Hello all my AP students. This is the screencast review for Unit 4 about cognition. Pretty big chapter. We had a lot of different combinations. We had the learning chapter, and then we went into memory, and then thinking and language were kind of combined. So make sure, first of all, that you looked at your concept maps that were given to you for each of these areas, and it really helps you organize these into subordinate and subordinate links and relationships to each other. So look those over. Also, throughout your whole binder, as well as the practice sheets that we have done in class, look those over. Make sure you pay attention to what you corrected in different colors, just as a visual reminder. And as always, good idea to use your study guide. Some of you are probably doing study groups right now. Online reviews, the Quiz Up, Quizlet, anything like that is good. And then finally, a little review from Units 2 and 3. Do you remember things like the myelin sheath, the neural impulse, generalizability? We're still working on that. Remember, we want to look at the sample size and representativeness. Parallel processing that happens unconsciously in the brain, and split brain, what goes to the left side, what goes to the right side, and then also Broca's area. So there's probably a good reason I put these on here for a review. Let's move on to this chapter. Lots of people to know. These, just so you know, this slide, all the people are kind of mixed up from their different areas. So we have Albert Bandura. He was the social learning guide, Bobo doll study. We have Noam Chomsky, who talked about the linguistic acquisition device, says that it's more on the nature side. We have Ebbinghaus's research. Definitely want to know this for the FRQ. He talked about not only how we want to space out our practices for retention, but also how we forget a whole lot right at first, and then that kind of evens off there. Pavlov, of course, his Pavlov dogs, his classical conditioning. Skinner for both learning with operant conditioning, and he applied that to language development, that we repeat what we've heard and then people reinforce us for doing that. So he was on the nurture side. Edward Thorndike was the man who came up with the law of effect. He used the cats in the puzzle boxes, and if you want something to happen more often, you reinforce it. Less often, you punish it. Watson, who was kind of the bad boy of classical conditioning, he trained little Albert. Elizabeth Loftus was the memory researcher and talked about false memories, how easy that is to develop. Jerry Garcia did his work with, again, in the learning situation, with particularly with classical conditioning, and how sometimes the neutral stimulus and the conditioned stimulus, neutral stimulus and unconditioned stimulus don't necessarily have to be paired really close together. That's the exception. Wolfgang Kohler and his chimp work with insight. Tolman, who did the cognitive map and the mice running that. Benjamin Whorf with linguistic determinism from language. And so I've given you a little bit of the answers, but certainly making your own matching exercises with these folks would be a really good way to review them. In the learning chapter, make sure you know the differences between associative learning, i.e. classical and operant conditioning, and cognitive types of learning. Insight, all that good stuff. The cognitive components even include the behavioral theories, so be aware with that. So in other words, if I want to reinforce a bird to do something, I should probably do it with flapping its wings or pecking the ground, not standing on one foot, something that's relative to them. And that also ties into the biological influence. Make sure you can identify all the components for classical and operant conditioning. Make sure you get the whole process of classical conditioning, all of those things that are listed there. Schedules of reinforcement, this is something new from intro. Remember, fixed is a set amount, variable is a changing amount, interval means time, ratio means response. So a fixed interval is a set amount of time. A variable ratio is a changing amount of responses. So there should be practice activities in your binder with that. And really the difference between shaping versus chaining. Shaping, if I'm trying to get someone to acquire the behavior, I'm going to reinforce them as they get closer and closer. Where chaining, they already know the behaviors. I'm making them do more behaviors before they get the reinforcement. And the overjustification effect. Some of you had research reviews on this. This is when I take something that people already like to do, but I somehow put a reward with it, and all of a sudden the reward becomes much more important than the experience with that. For memory, in the memory chapter, make sure you look back at binder page 10. That's got a great review chart with the 3 major parts of the sensory memory, short-term / working memory, and long-term memory. Make sure you know the 3 parts of sensory memory: iconic, echoic, and haptic. Make sure you know the branches of long-term memory, implicit and explicit, and what those types of differences are between those branches. Make sure you know the process that it goes through, the 3 steps of the process. And then also there's a little bit, your book does a nice job of covering the difference between effortful and automatic encoding, and there were different parts of automatic encoding, like times. Gosh, I've ran into you 3 times today, that sort of thing. So go back and review that. And then also, this is pretty straightforward, but the difference between recalling something, pulling it from memory, versus recognition, multiple choice question, or relearning. Hey, we learned this in intro psych, and now it's so much easier to relearn it in AP psych. Also, you want to recall specific, underline, hint, hint, encoding strategies. So things like the serial position, where we're going to remember the first and the last part, among others. There's others encoding strategies. Make sure you know the difference between forgetting and misremembering, and the things that can lead to that. Decay, not using it, remembering it, but from a different source amnesia, if you will. The biological aspects, what part of the brains are being used for sensory memory, for getting it from short-term to long-term memory, and then where different types of memories are stored in the brain. The idea of long-term potentiation, that $50 word there, that's really talking about the neural pathways in our brains and the opening up, the hypersensitivity that we're giving to our neurons in order to remember something. And then the elusive memory trace. It would be really nice if we could trace the path through the brain. We think it's there, but we can't actually trace it on paper or in a brain scan. Moving on to thinking then, lots of different concepts with thinking. Get it? Concepts? Okay, anyway, so we have our concept. If I say home, what comes to mind? That's your concept. But your idealized concept is your prototype. And then a hierarchy is, again, that organization of things within a concept. So if I think school, well, how is a school organized? Is it by seniors, juniors, sophomores, freshmen? Is it by students, teachers, principals? That's what we mean by a hierarchy. Strategies, how can we help with our thinking? Priming, trying to get somebody to remember things. An algorithm versus the 2 types of heuristics, those mental shortcuts or those heuristics. Framing a question, again, in a way to make something sound a little better. Do you want this car with all of its original parts, or do you want the car that's never been fixed up? Okay. Insight, the aha moment. Creative thinking and the aspects that help us with creative thinking, being an expert in the area, not having to have one right answer, were just a few of those. And then those obstacles to thinking. 2 types of fixation that we talked about, functional fixedness and mental set. Make sure you know which one of those involves an object. Confirmation bias, the I knew it all along, I'm just going to look for what I think is true. Belief perseverance, even if something is shown to be false, I continue in my beliefs. Representative versus availability heuristic, know which one has the prototype involved. And then hindsight bias. And then for language, stages of development, starting from babbling to household babbling and so forth and so on. Make sure you can lay those out. The different parts of language, know the difference between morphemes and phonemes and which adds more meaning. remember, as far as, we tried counting some of these out, so, practice that just a little bit. There'll be one or two of those on there. Semantics, meaning versus syntax, order of words. Lexicon is just another word for dictionary, so you might see the word lexicon, so just know that that's what it means. Theories of acquisition, I mentioned this in the second slide, but Skinner on the nurture side versus Chomsky on the nature side. Linguistic determinism, again, that was Benjamin Whorf, and our culture plays a big part in that. And finally, for your FRQs, remember your whole task is to leave no doubt in my mind that you know exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes that's even hard for me, but even if you're not asked for a definition, go ahead, throw one in there. Remember, just a couple words can make a difference between scoring a point and not scoring a point. Can you explain how the concepts relate to each other? And here's an example, how punishment relates to learned helplessness, how really it leads to learned helplessness is what I would be expecting you to tell me. And think of how you can tie these concepts into your school life. All of this should be very applicable to you. And yes, one of the FRQs will be about how different things are met in school life. So yeah, be ready for that. So I think that's it. I will put these slides online as well. Please tweet me any questions or email me if you want to be private about it. And yeah, good luck. I know you'll do great. See you later.